I'd just like to say that with the looking back, I'm just wanting to reflect that I'm very happy to be here with my mentors and colleagues. I did my Masters of Social Work at Sydney University and happened to have Mary Lane, who was a fellow colleague at the same time studying a Masters at the same year as I, and also with Stuart. And it was in the mid-80s that I had also been inspired to be involved in wanting to work in international aid and development. I joined a group called Women in Development, and also inspired very much by people like Helen Caldecott, having joined the People and Nuclear Disarmament, and also Elizabeth Evatt, who was working very much in that time as one of the human rights commissioners in Geneva, reporting on the CEDAW convention that was her responsibility. Noam Chomsky comes to mind around that period as well, the 80s, during the time when we were fired, as a big influence, and I think he was the last talk he gave in the 1980s when he was in Australia, before he came back recently to accept the Sydney Peace Prize. I say this because these people are also being very much key people that have also influenced the work and what people at the centre are doing to this day. And that I'd like to say that it's wonderful to be able to see that the history of what we've been hearing and looking back, that many of us are here now, looking forward to be able to continue the foundations and the excellent work in these areas of peace and social justice. And it is that peace and social justice theme that I think really resonates for me. I had been asked by Stuart to come in 2000 to be a human rights fellow, to set up the first human rights course for the master's program, and the course was called Understanding and Attaining Human Rights. And I had been working for the last 12 years in the humanitarian aid development field, as Ken mentioned. It was during the 90s that I worked in Sudan, Afghanistan. I was in Bosnia. I also was in Rwanda, in Kosovo, in Burma. And all during those war zones, I was there very much at the height of the crisis and had seen, as many of you could imagine, unacceptable, unimaginable human rights violations that I was very, very committed to want to work on particular issues at that time, particularly in relation to refugees, the issues of refugee women, the issues of violence in Bosnia in particular, the crimes against humanity in relation to the first trial of rape in war. If many of you remember, it was the very first time that rape in war was considered a war crime. After that, I was also involved in the international campaign to ban landmines and subsequently cluster munitions, which also led to the international humanitarian law, which the Mine Ban Treaty came to be the global ban on landmines, and subsequently the international ban on cluster munitions. With that background, I wanted to have the experience of refugees to tell their stories in this human rights course, and that was one of the things that I was very strong to want to have the students at the CPACs and the master's programs understand that to understand human rights, it was always very important to actually hear the story of the actual human rights victims and the people who had been affected by human rights directly, because it was by people being able to give their personal stories and hearing the experiences directly, the students would be in a position to also, I think, respond to a collective responsibility of how to educate people about human rights and how to supervise human rights and how to implement human rights. So from that time, in 2000 until 2002, I can say that now, 2015, we really have to have a rethink about human rights. I think in the 21st century, we've really got to look at the way in which we're focusing on human rights because the communications revolution, and particularly I think the international emphasis on hard security, has really focused on us to look at the whole discourse of human rights now. We need to, how can I say, for the future, focus more on universal, a holistic approach of how we're looking at human rights. By that I mean we need to link women's rights with political, social, economic and environmental rights. And this is something that in this current world, the need to have a holistic approach is not really being understood, nor is it being really explained in the nature of international conflicts as we are seeing it today. I also believe that we need to look at more effective strategies for human rights advocacy because of the communications revolution that's happening, and also this focus on hard security. I was working during the 90s, the decade of the 90s, when there was a lot more effort on what we call soft power, focus on dialogue, focus on diplomacy, and working to get worldwide and well-informed opinion around the issues affecting crisis and conflict. And it seems like after 9/11, it's all suddenly been a situation where people are taking sides, and we're losing the whole approach of dialogue and being able to focus. And as Nelson Mandela said, one of our strongest weapons for peace is dialogue. And I feel that for the future, and particularly for students who are studying at the centre, that there needs to be much more emphasis on equipping the students with skills and dialogue. And in the humanitarian aid and development field now, there needs to be a lot more better understanding of conflict analysis. Yes, we have to go and respond by providing health, we have to provide emergency relief, we have to provide shelter and water. All of these things are absolutely necessary. No one's questioning that. But in the nature of conflicts now, the speed, the scale, and the level of disruption that's happening in the international conflict situation, with crises now becoming transnational, problems without passports. There's a huge number of new technologies. There's diverse actors, and also the political economic shifts is making the humanitarian landscape now such that aid workers, development workers, people working, lawyers, people working in the peace field in conflicts now are needing to have a much better grasp of the actual conflict itself. And this is something that we need to be able to perhaps give as a challenge for the centre, to be able to look at ways in which we could equip the students who are wanting to work in this field in the future to have those skills. An example of that is the Reconnecting Communities project that a few of us here in the centre have come together to look at ways in which we could connect with communities who have come from the refugee diaspora from conflicts, who are in Australia now, who actually want to support peace back in their country. I'm talking about countries, for example, such as South Sudan, the Great Lakes, countries such as from Sri Lanka, from Sri Lanka, where the communities actually want to support peace and engage in dialogue and healing and reconciliation with their communities. And here at CPACS, some of us are wanting to have the students to get first-hand experience of working with communities who have been affected by conflict, so that they can actually get some practical skills of what it takes to be able to learn about peace, and to be able to learn how we can engage in finding ways to build trust, to build social cohesion, to engage in dialogue with communities affected by conflict. So this is a practical example of what we're doing, and hopefully we will be able to get support to continue this, and also to be able to get the students in the course to have some practical experience of putting peace in practice. So I think I'll just end there and sort of